Hello and welcome back to the Real Matrix Files. Thank you for being here. I mentioned something in the previous podcast that I was going to talk about the vandalism being done by mobile technology of the planet and celebrity deaths. Before I get into that, it's probably important for me to precursor all of that with some information about what is actually happening online in a very general sense. And this information you may already be familiar with, but it comes into play when we start looking at vandalism and celebrity death. So what I wanted to share with you today is some facts about energy and the types of energy that end up in our airwaves. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but it's just data. It's just being broken down and sent from one place to another, etc., etc. Well, that is actually true. It is data. But as we discussed in a previous podcast, we looked a little bit more closely at the technology itself and the energy that is merging with the technology and the signal and the frequencies that this information is being passed through on, and how it can impact the human biofield, human health and mental health, and beyond that, the planet. So what is actually happening? For a very long time now, since I think social media became popular, it is a trend, it is a fad, it won't be around forever. But since it became popular, we were in new territory. And at the start of Facebook and Twitter, there were certain features to those networks that were not in play as they are now. And back then, I think I've mentioned this already, but you couldn't reply to a post. You certainly couldn't quote a post. You couldn't retweet. You could really only subscribe to somebody's content and perhaps share it if you felt that it was, this is on Facebook, that it was something that you're into. Twitter, as you know, you have always been able to reply to what somebody says. And to retweet, somebody actually had to copy and paste the tweet itself, the words themselves, and put RT at the front to let everybody know that that was not their words and that they were replying or sharing what this other person had said. And 99.9% of the time, when people replied or shared what other people had said, it was positive. There was a positive energy being generated 99.9% of the time. And this was back when it first started. What's happened is the positive energy that was circulating on these networks, 2004, 2006, was very apparent. It was also quite normal. It was a natural way of being for most people. And it went without saying, and it went without being questioned. It was only when trolls and bullies came online, that they started to abuse the reply feature. And when retweeting became its own specific feature and quote tweeting became its own specific feature, of course, these tools of communication were further abused by angry and hateful people. I'm not going to get into whatever their problems are, but I'm just referring to the content that they have felt is going to make the world better. It doesn't. It's futile. It generates negative energy. Negative energy is destructive. So there is never a case, there is never an instance where anything said with negative energy is going to make anything better for anybody, least of all the person saying it, and most of all for the people receiving it who are subjected to the negative energy. Now, how this has sort of driven the overall view that social media is toxic is precisely for that reason. The negative energy that is generated now, especially on Twitter and, all of them, is overwhelming any positive energy or any positive result that can be had for it. And everybody will have noticed how our collective society on this planet has deteriorated quite rapidly since 2006. So in just 15 or so years, there has been a drastic reduction in positivity in the world. Everybody is aware that if you come onto a social media network, you are automatically now going to be subjected to negative energy and negative content. This did not used to be the case. Not when these networks first started. What's actually happening when this type of energy is being produced and generated and spun through the airwaves at the speed of light, especially directed at certain people, whether it's targeted hate or targeted harassment, is there is a directed energy attack that is being perpetrated on that individual. It is technically physical assault because of the impact that it can have and does have on that person's mental state and further on their actual physical state because of how the physical body responds to the mental impact. It is also directly a physical assault because the violence of the negative energy is automatically interpenetrating the human body's biofield, impacting the human being at a cellular level. So just so we've got this clear, negative energy, hate, bullying, snark, hideous memes, derogatory statements, all of these sorts of things, and we've all done it. I think most people have at some point, regardless of which side of the fence you sit on. Everybody feels they're doing the right thing, but these are just the facts. These are the facts of energy. Now, what ends up happening and why I have referred to this technology and these networks as terrorism is when we have a collective pool of data that is constantly flowing through the airwaves at the speed of light in the form of words, numbers, code, images. And we've looked at how this then manifests into the real world. Essentially, the conclusion that we make when looking at the relationship between online activity and what ends up happening offline is that actual terrorism in the world, the physical world, is being caused and set into motion by terrorism online. Now, you might think terrorism is a strong word to use for, just something that someone says about something with a particularly sort of aggressive tone. You might not think that that counts as terrorism. Well, if it's politically based, it is, for a start. And secondly, terrorism also infers a particular tone of violence. It is a particularly dark and evil insinuation that goes along with the word terrorism, terror, which is just that one step up from fear. It's sort of sheer fear, being absolutely terrified. Now, when we're dealing with fear as an energy and being terrified or being scared, this is not just an emotion that we are experiencing. Our physical body experiences the sensation of fear and terror. The immune system goes into shock. The nervous system goes into shock. The brain goes into shock. Online and off. This is what happens offline when there are terrorist attacks, violence, and crime. This is what happens online when there are raids, attacks on people, pylons, nasty memes, bullying, targeted harassment, and hate. It's very important that anybody using a smartphone to access a social media network, for them to understand that every single word they say and the energy with which they say it is transmitted at the speed of light, directed to the other person and to everybody else, because it's all connected. Once it's out there, it's out there, unless it is reported and deleted. The level of violence that is occurring, the level of verbal assaults that are occurring, regardless of the actual content of the debate, is what we need to be looking at. So what I'm saying to you is, it doesn't matter what it is that you're arguing about. What matters is how you discuss it. Because ultimately, only the energy that is generated is what will impact offline reality. So we could be extremely righteous, for example, and we could be doing the right thing. We could be saying the right thing for the right reasons. But if we are emitting a toxic, negative, and destructive energy while we do that. We are only creating toxic and destructive energy, regardless of what is being said. And that's a tricky one to get around, because when you're on the ropes and people are coming at you and you might feel you're trying to defend yourself, which is your right, or that they're going ad hominem and attacking you rather than the argument, all sorts of complications that come into it when you're dealing with bullies or people who aren't particularly open-minded to hearing anybody else's views. It is true that we have the right to defend ourselves, and we do have the right to assert our boundaries with others. But if in doing that we generate more negative energy, we have not succeeded in achieving anything. We've merely added to that pool of negative energy, which is what's getting everybody down, which is what's killing people. Yes, actually killing people. Most bullies actually want to end your presence. They want you to leave the conversation. And the worst of them aren't satisfied with you leaving the conversation. They want you off the internet completely, which is kind of strange because you still exist in the real world. They just figure that the internet is their little sacred haven, and they don't want anyone in it that's in their eyes unwelcome, which is very childish and not to do with equality or unity at all. So the terrorism aspect of the technology is not just, as we discussed in a previous podcast, it is not just the chemical composition of the phones or the engineering of the networks. It is the energy the collective energy that's being generated. Twitter is a terrorism network, and so is Facebook. Because of the way they're being used, and because of the GPS systems also in play with the URLs being internally connected with Google Maps and GPS. So if you've been using the social networks in such a way as that they're private accounts and the only people you come into contact with are your family and friends, etc., even then you might think that you're not contributing to any sort of negative output in the world, that you're cordoned off in some quiet corner. But no, you are actually live to air, the same as everybody else. It's just that other people can't see it with their eyes. It is still in the airwaves. And 9 times out of 10, even in your own family groups and friends, there will be content that floats in, or content that you produce, or things that you reply to that generate negative energy. It's very rare to find 100% positive people in the world. And with so many controversial issues happening, there are going to be heated discussions. Nonetheless, this is what's happening. It's been happening for a long time. It's destroyed lives. It's destroyed children's lives. It's killed people. It's killed celebrities. I'll get into that. Public figures. America's political system's obviously a joke, some sort of bad joke. Most of it's been generated from that, and more recently, because of COVID going viral online, and people not being able to talk about anything else, it's been generated from that as well. And overall, what I've noticed is that people are afraid of living and they're afraid of dying. And then from that pretty awful position, they seem to be fairly confident in everything that they're saying. Really, at the end of the day, it's one loud cry for help. I think that is honestly really what unifies everybody on this planet, is to acknowledge that we're all crying for help. And until we examine the reasons for that very closely, singular reasons, not to do with politics, not to do with policies, not to do with laws, not to do with anything more than the fact that we are a people that is governed over. We are born into a system of rulers, and we have to play by the rules. If we want to be successful, 9 times out of 10, we have to sell out to do it. Invite a lot of problems. The lucky ones choose a different path, spiritual path, whatever you want to call it, and live quietly in the country or the mountains somewhere and be at one with nature. But this is what's happening. There is a foreboding, toxic, dark, negative, bilious, sickening, hateful, vitriolic, violent, frightened, terrorizing energy that is being produced by social media networks and the people using these networks, including politicians. Politicians who are supposed to set a good example for others, setting the worst example they possibly could, and then having the nerve to suggest that they're good role models and that minors should be getting involved in politics as soon as possible. Yes, they are suggesting the adulteration of minors with adult concepts. These are the people we're dealing with, no matter which party you vote for, whether it's in Australia, Britain, America, or anywhere else. That's what's in the air. That is what is in the air. A saturation of frequencies with negativity. It's overwhelming, it's overbearing, it's oppressive. It creates violence, despair, disease, and disaster. I went for 5 years, no continual activity on social media, and for a few years without social media at all. I was fine, but what I noticed was that I found it incredibly difficult to be in environments where there were a lot of smartphones around me, or to communicate with people who spent a lot of time on Facebook. They seemed as if they were not really present. They repeated whatever the mainstream news media was saying, and they often behaved in ways that were so below the previous standard of conduct that most people engaged in this world before the deracination of respect by social media apps and the people using them and the poor management of these apps. The standard of behaviour, of communication of people that I came in contact with during that time and still now is quite low. And that's putting it kindly. I grew up in a time where the standard code of conduct was always respectful, always polite, always considerate, correct ourselves when we were wrong, and try to learn and grow and be good people in a very unassuming and mostly humble way. And we would apply ourselves to our work, our social lives, our relationships, our friendships, and our leisure time with a sense of optimism, positivity, hope, and youthful invincibility. That reality, that existence has gone. That lightness of being has gone. We are being weighed down, oppressed, suffocated, depressed, and lorded over by negativity and fear. Now, it was already apparent through commercial mass media, news media. Everyone would say, why would you want to watch the news? It's the bad news. It's depressing. Who wants to sit down for dinner and watch that? And eventually we caught on. Maybe watching the news is not such a healthy thing to do. They rarely talk about anything positive. They make all their money off negativity and drama. They understand the chemical addiction that humans develop to drama and aggression and fighting. And all of it is a massive stupidity because it doesn't achieve what they're thinking that it will achieve. It automatically is counterproductive because the energy that they're trying to achieve it with is destructive. The only types of energy that can create something positive that everyone can be happy with is positive energy. Consideration, respect, understanding that not everybody's going to see things the same way. Understanding what sort of subjects are better left not discussed so that you can preserve friendships. We never used to talk about politics in public or religion because they're very divisive subjects. And they were respected by everybody as somebody's private and personal decision and choice. But now, that's all anybody talks about. Whatever latest drama, or whatever latest political shenanigans is occurring, and if you're not voting for the same party as somebody else, well, they just won't like you anymore. Even worse, they'll bully and threaten and intimidate and harass and oppress and try to snuff you out in some way, shape or form. It's pathetic. An actual pathetic existence of a human being to have been reduced to that form of communication with others when they have one life to live and they are engaging in producing toxic energy that is automatically destructive and counterproductive of whatever it is they're trying to achieve. It's moronic, ignorant, and habitual. So when we have this negative energy, this toxic energy, at the speed of light, 24 hours of every day, what do you think the end result will be? If it's destructive energy, what do you think the end result will be? Destruction. Self-destruction. Destruction of positivity, destruction of love, destruction of beauty, destruction of nature, destruction of innocence, destruction of spirituality, destruction of anything positive that we actually need. So, as I mentioned earlier, the reason I'm bringing this up before we talk about celebrity deaths and how they tie into these files and technology, and the vandalism that is occurring in the world, especially with weather disturbances. Let's just call them that, so that we don't ruffle any feathers about whoever believes in climate change and start a fight between people who don't know how to discuss anything diplomatically. It's very important to understand what I've just said about energy as a precursor to being able to understand what I will share with you in the next podcast about the impact on public figures, celebrity deaths, and the vandalism of our planet as a result of this technology. What is being done to our children? Thanks for listening. This one's only half an hour long. I wanted to, as I said, just put this out there for you, just to make a very fine and clear point about the nature of the energy with which we communicate. And yes, in being quite precise with you and quite assertive with you, there's no love in what I've said. I have not delivered what I've said to you with love, and it will contribute to the negative energy, regardless of the truth of what I have said to you. Sad but true. And unfortunately, we get put into a position where the only way that we feel that we can be clear and concise is to be neutral and simply get the information out there. But this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm noticing. It's getting extremely bad. Extremely bad. It's nauseating. It's sickening. It's harmful, destructive, and it's fatiguing. It's absolutely exhausting to engage in any type of online content now without being bombarded with a whirlwind of toxic energy. For all the reasons mentioned, it's a shame that levels of education in the world have not included the basic science of mobile technology and how people use it in the way that I have just explained it to you, so that people understand that that type of toxic output is only destructive. And it's only destructive of everything. It's not just destructive of some things. It's destructive of everything, including the person producing it, the people receiving it, even the people they don't want to receive it. So in doing it, they're hurting themselves and absolutely everything else. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. And as promised, I will get to you soon with a new podcast about celebrity deaths, how they are being engineered and manufactured by the technology that's being used by default, not necessarily deliberately. It is mostly by default because of the system. And vandalism. We'll get into that when I get back. Thanks for listening.